So in 2018, Jonathan Haidt, he published the groundbreaking book, The Coddling of the American Mind. In this book, he dives into how well-intentioned safety culture and overprotection, they are ironically increasing anxiety and fragility in young people. The Coddling of the American Mind, it's been an incredibly impactful book for me as a parent. It's made me rethink how we're raising kids today. And I think especially applies even in sports. In 2004, now Haidt published The Anxious Generation. You probably have heard of it. It is a powerful follow-up that really zeroes in on how smartphones and social media are significantly contributing to the youth mental health crisis. Now, this book, it's taken the world by storm, not just as an eye-opener, but as a call to action. I mean, it's sparking community-led initiatives all around the world. Even in my own community in Ireland, parents are coming together and they are making agreements to delay smartphone use until at least the age of 14 or at the end of primary school. I've honestly never seen a book lead to such a groundswell of community action. And it's fascinating, honestly, to witness, and it's encouraging. Because the reality is we all know that smartphones, they pose challenges for young people, they pose challenges for ourselves as well. But the anxious generation, it presents the scope of the problem in a way that I think is even more alarming than we may have thought or realized. So today I'm excited to dive into these ideas with Zachary Rausch, who's the Associate Research Scientist at NYU Stern School of Business, and he's the lead researcher for The Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt's book. Zach has been instrumental in bringing Haidt's findings to light, and he'll discuss the Coddling of the American Mind, his impact, that in the book's impact on himself, as well as the anxious generation, particularly the concept of anti-fragility and the benefits of phone-free experiences, and some strategies to help Gen Z manage their smartphone usage. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. I'm JP Nerman. I'm joined by my co-host, Betsy Butterick. Our mission here is simple. We want to help coaches become better leaders and build better team cultures. If you're interested in learning more about our work as leadership coaches and facilitators, or if you want to explore our online courses and books, head on over to tocculture.com and betsybutterick.com. While you're at tocculture.com, don't forget to subscribe to our weekly newsletter. It's packed with notes from each podcast episode, our latest articles, and practical culture building tips. Also, just one more thing before we jump into today's episode. I think this is a great one to share with your parents potentially within your program. Share it, have a conversation about it, encourage them to check out the book, The Anxious Generation. I think this is something that their engagement, their understanding could make a significant difference within your work to bring about some change within your athletes. So Zach, we're excited to have you on the podcast here today. I'm curious, as we're kind of getting our conversation started, if you could share a little bit about your journey into becoming the lead researcher for this book, The Anxious Generation, which has had such an impact already globally, not just in the States, but even in Ireland where I live. What led you to, becoming the lead researcher on this book, and how did this kind of start to shape your understanding of today's young people?
Yeah. Well, JP and Betsy, thank you so much for having me on, and hello to all your listeners. I'm thrilled to get to talk to such a unique coaching audience. This is my first sports podcast, kind of. But my background is I started to work with John Haidt in March of 2020. I was in graduate school. I was studying experimental psychology. But my kind of journey to that point is actually a little bit more informative here, which was that I was struggling with a lot of different mental health problems throughout my early 20s. And really one of the things that really changed my life was I began working in wilderness therapy. And so I was leading expedition trips for kids in Connecticut, out in the woods for weeks. And it was really like, while I was leading those trips and given the trust from my mentors at the program, that I really learned to come to feel much more competent in myself and what I was capable of doing. And So while I was at grad school, I read John's book, The Coddling of the American Mind, which was all about the way we've been overprotecting kids, not giving them the opportunity for risk taking and challenge and growth. And I just loved the book. And so I did some research on it, connected with him. And then my role with John kind of slowly evolved over time. And my focus was originally around more of the overprotection, the lack of challenge and risk that kids were not getting. And then it shifted into seeing just how much childhood changed, even beyond when I was a kid. I was born in 1994. And in the ways that social media, smartphones had just infused into kids' daily lives. And so that was kind of the starting point for the anxious generation. And so I've been worked with him the last 2 years to help write this book.
Mm. I'm curious, before we kind of start really jumping into the anxious generation and technology, just so much connected for you, it seems like, between some of this wilderness therapy, being out in the woods, out in nature, maybe there's risk, adventure in that. And then over here, this book, it had this message, like you said, and there was a connection between that. Whether it's wilderness therapy or even just kids going down to the local playground and playing pickup basketball or soccer, like those experiences do not seem to exist for our young people either. As much as maybe they did for myself growing up, yourself or Betsy here. And yeah, I don't know just if you could speak to that, just that connection and maybe some of the lessons that you learned around that wilderness therapy that might actually speak to coaches.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to give a broad view of kind of entering into the book a little bit, is what we argue is that childhood went through a rapid transformation between 2010 and 2015 in particular, where we moved from a childhood that we call is primarily play-based, one that is embodied, physical, in the real world with other kids and often unsupervised, into one that is primarily phone-based, where you're spending an average of 5 hours a day on social media, 8 to 10 hours on your screens. And it's not just kids, adults are doing this as well. And it's just a total rewiring of the way that we're interacting and socializing with each other. Um, it is that plus the additional context of we've starting before 2010, really beginning in the 1980s, we start to clamp down on kids' abilities to be out and free reign with each other out in the world. And so it's those two forces that really came together, which we believe is driving a lot of the mental health struggles of young people. In the coddling of the American mind, one of the things that John was really paying attention to was that as Gen Z, the kids who were born after 1995, started to enter college campuses, they were feeling much more anxious, much more depressed, much more fragile in many ways. And part of the reason that he described in that book is that kids were not getting the foundational experiences that they need to grow up. Um, Specifically, having independence and time to manage conflict and engage with different kinds of stressors in the real world with other kids. And one of the concepts that really stuck with me from that book, and it also is a big part of the anxious generation, is a term that was phrased by Nassim Taleb, who's a mathematician at New York University, called anti-fragility. I don't know if you guys have heard the term,
Hmm.
but just real quick on it, he describes that really there are three kinds of systems in the world. There are things that are fragile, like a wine glass. You drop it, it shatters. You don't want to apply stress to it. There are things that are robust. So, if you have a plastic cup and you drop it, the it preserves. The plastic cup doesn't break, but it doesn't. That's it. And then there are systems that are anti-fragile. So those are like things like our immune system. It's typically living organisms that actually require that you intake some dirt, some bacteria. You want stressors, you want strain, and then that in turn helps you get stronger. Now, you don't want to like pound yourself, like throw viruses into you all the time. Or another example is the muscles in our body. So we need to stress and strain our muscles in order for them to grow. And when we don't actually use them, they begin to atrophy. And so that's why we go to the gym. That's why we do all these things. But also, you don't want to put like a 300-pound dumbbell on the back of a 10-year-old. That wouldn't be great either. So there's a moderate level of risk and strain that you need. And the insight that John had, I believe, from the coddling of the American mind is that we began to see children as fragile, not as anti-fragile. We believe that kids need protection and safety, and like the elimination of risk and strain is actually the best way to grow, to help kids grow. And we kind of forgot about the insight that actually, in order to grow, in order to thrive, you need those kinds of challenges. And that's exactly what I experienced when I was working in wilderness therapy. I was thrown out into the woods with like 15 kids and was told just to figure it out. And it was really messy and it wasn't always fun. And kids were crying. One kid broke his arm at one point. So there were things that happened that was stressful. But over time, it was, for me, and we've heard it from the kids as well, it's one of the greatest opportunities to feel that other adults in particular trust that we are competent. And I think that kind of insight really is so important for mentors and coaches. And the shift into the phone-based childhood, which we can talk about, is kind of the other side of the coin of what also has been happening to young people.
There's so many things are coming up for me, Zach, as you are talking. And I'm thinking about, so I was born in 83, but we were gone on our bikes all day, no cell phones. Parents didn't know where we were. They had an idea, you might be near so-and-so's house, but just the way childhood has changed. And I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And we were out the other day at a brewery in town, and both of them are picking up rocks and just putting them on the wall. And I remember saying to my wife, I was like, see, this is what childhood should be, just like we're playing with dirt. And you mentioned that anti-fragility. And in the work that I do with coaches and departments and teams, so much of what we hear in terms of judgment about Gen Z, about kids these days, is that they're soft, that they're fragile. And in a lot of the work that I do, one, creating that understanding. Well, why are they showing up the way that they are? Why are we seeing increases in anxiety and depression and suicide rates? And starting to offer, because sport is a teaching opportunity, if we can connect with them first, then we stand a much better chance of teaching them some of the skills that are less developed because of the way they've been raised with technology. So if we can, I'd love to bring this a little bit into a sport context in service of many of our listeners, and ask, okay, if we've got kids that don't have some of the more robust risk-taking like initiatives or capacity of previous generations, because what I hear is coaches saying, well, we just need to toughen them up, right? And it's like, yes. And as you were just mentioning with the muscles, like there's a threshold capacity for how much we can push without doing damage. So if you were thinking about coaches, without being sports specific, what advice would you offer about how we can start to build some of that resilience, to build some of that toughness while not overstepping into trauma?
That's a really great question. I think one of the most important things, it's very simple, and it's a huge recommendation we have in the book, is around creating boundaries and spaces around technology, because phones in particular are what we call experience blockers. When you have the phone up in your face all day, you're cutting out all of these different opportunities to engage and to learn and to grow. And so even just having a rule of getting devices out of whatever sports practices that you have, one of the most important things that I think coaches can do is we need to work to get more kids playing sports after school, getting into team sports in particular. I think are really valuable, because this is an opportunity for kids to develop some of those skills that maybe they didn't get when they were younger. I'm not exactly sure how this can play out. This is definitely not my area of expertise, but another part of the book, and we were speaking to it before, is the idea of independence, and independence from adults as well. and kids really haven't had much of that opportunity. And so one of the things I'd love to talk about and think about is like, how can coaches help give a little bit more free rein so they're not over supervising every aspect of a team practice? How do you create a dynamic where the kids are taking on more responsibility, where kids have more independence, mentoring each other? I think those are the kinds of experiences that young people are really want and really need.
Yeah, and you mentioned there like being thrust out into nature with 14 other kids and saying, figure it out. And that space and that time to do that was like really transformative for you. And for me, that's like, yeah, what does that look like in sports? And obviously probably varies by age. I think definitely for our younger age group, definitely there's more structured sports than ever. Like the coach is always there, they're running it, whereas there's probably a lot more unstructured play, free play. And I think there's probably a difference between those two things. And so even, we as coaches probably can create more free play time or more just even simple things, that I've seen where we used to have a thing where you'd pick teams at recess or in the yard.
Mhm.
Now we don't do that anymore because we're really concerned around the feelings, the mental health, and
Right.
and I think maybe there's a bit of a pendulum swing there. And so, we've tried to, I've just seen with my daughter's team trying to incorporate some sort of captains of the team. Hey, you're the captain today. You're leading. You decide the positions of everybody on your team. Trying to find this balance there. At the older groups, we really push for like what we call leadership council, Zach. That is in charge of mentoring 3 or 4 players in the team, and we're kind of throwing them into it. I think what I see though is a lot of coaches grow frustrated because they're not willing to give them the time, or they're not willing to coach
Yes.
them to help them through the reflection to fail, to experience that difficulty. And maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And I had just heard this story the other day about a school that was trying to implement more of this free play time during recess and after school. And one of the things that came up was the kids didn't know what to do with their time at first. So they were going to try to like start some sort of pickup baseball game, but they were like, how do I do this? What do I do? Like just the basic skills of organizing the team together, um, managing the conflict that emerges on the field. Like these are all essential skills that really need to be learned. And in fact, having some, like you were saying, some element of exclusion, some difficulty, I mean, that's part of life, and that's really important for kids to experience. And yeah, I think for coaches, it's going to be needing to give kids more time because they didn't have necessarily the kind of childhood that you may have had growing up. And it's really important to give them that space to work it out. And I do believe that, given some time, those skills will really start to resurface. Just to get an intuitive sense of just how much childhood has really changed, I was thinking about like, imagine that we all have a bucket, like a big bucket, and our childhood, uh, which represents our childhood. And we would put in time with friends, time with family into that bucket, and it starts to get full. Sleep goes in there, um, uh, having hobbies, reading books, playing sports, and that's the bucket that we had. Um, but for Gen Z today, um, again, the average amount of time that they're spending on screens is 8 to 10 hours. And when you do that every single day, I mean, the bucket is almost full. And then we try to put in sleep, time with friends, exercise. There's such a little amount that is left for them to try to fill that time. And so I think if we're thinking about this as a transformation of childhood that has been going on for years for these kids, they've had such little time to develop the skills that they need. And so it's going to take time to really get them to cultivate those different skills.
I really appreciate you sharing. I want to kind of jump into this idea around screens and phone usage, because this is obviously so much of what the discussion was around the anxious generation. I mean, I think us coaches, we don't like to see our players on their phone all the time. Um, and yet it's how we reach out to them. It's how we connect to them. And then they're practicing, and practice is over, and instantly they want to be on their phones, right? we're on the bus. I mean, bus trips used to be fun and used to be interactive and funny and goofing off. And now bus trips are everyone's on their phone, right? And it's kind of really tough to see that. Like, I don't think there's any coach that wants their kids constantly on their phones, but they are. And so the challenge is the phone has become such a necessity for them. It's so essential, especially with, the change in the sporting landscape and NIL deals and brand. What are ways that, I know you don't do a lot of work with coaches, but what are ways that you're encouraging parents and educators to help young people see that this is a problem for them and to encourage some sort of change?
Yeah, what's so interesting about what you said is like, how do we get them to see that this is a problem? And in fact, what we've actually seen in the research is that young people know that this is not great for them. And actually, many of them do not want to be using it as much as they are. And so this is actually where the role of adults come in. Um, but why do I say this? There was a study that was done in 2023 that looked at um, it was among college students, so not teenagers, but they asked them how much money it would take to get them to stop using Instagram or TikTok for a month. And they said $50. So you would think that, okay, so they do want to use these platforms. But then they asked the question again and they said, how much would you pay to use these platforms for a month, not to stop using them for a month, if we got the rest of your campus to do so as well? And the answer to that was actually the inverse. It went down into the negative numbers, which means that the participants, the students, would actually pay the researchers to do this, to get everybody else off of the platforms. And so the essence of what we're looking at is a classic collective action problem where many kids, many young people don't want to be using these platforms, but feel like they need to because that's what everybody else is doing. And so when we're talking about phone use in schools, phone use on school buses, in reality, what's probably happening is a feeling of pressure of, well, this is what everybody else is doing, and this is how I stay connected. And so both parents and teens and probably coaches feel trapped in a way that, if you tell one kid, no, you can't use social media, you can't have a phone, but everybody else does, they're more socially isolated, they're disconnected, and may put them at some sort of disadvantage. And so the solution is that we have to do things at group levels, changing group norms. So what we recommend in the book is a lot about delaying. So delaying smartphones until high school, because it's during middle school where we really see the most problems arising from social media and smartphone use. Trying to delay access to social media until 16. And then really phone-free schools, which is a huge thing that's been happening all around the country, of of bell-to-bell policies. And this is crucial because what you were just saying is that kids go to their sports practice and then right after you pick up their phone. It's the same thing that happens with classes. You may have to put the phone away during class time, but then you're in the hallway and the phone's in your face. You're in the lunchroom, the phone's in your face, and you're at recess, the phone's in the face. And so what we really want to do is to create institutional boundaries with these technologies so that kids can really experience what many of us experienced when we were younger, which is an extended period of time away from devices with each other. And it's those opportunities in the lunchroom and the hallways that it will naturally start to build those social skills and all of the different skills that we were talking about earlier. And hopefully that the schools can help create some policies, maybe also around sport norms of what do you do in the school buses and trying to help alleviate that collective action problem.
And you're spot on, Zach, with that felt peer pressure, especially in sport. JP was mentioning, name, image, likeness, and the way an individual can become their own brand because of technology, because of social media, with access to their phone. So they're arguably spending more time, especially at the college level, on their phone, utilizing that tool to optimize the way that they can monetize their brand. So we're seeing an increase in that felt need to do so. So it almost feels like, oh, what chance do we stand, at actually getting them to reduce? Have you found that not just creating structures institutionally or systems to optimize either the delay of or minimize the interaction with, but have you seen anything be effective for teaching the value of screen-free time with kids of any age? Like how can we invite them into an experience where they start to appreciate not having their phone or not having access to that technology all the time?
So I think one of the most important things that can be done is to help young people see why these products exist in the first place. What are they meant to do? Why, does Instagram, how does Facebook, how does TikTok make their money? And a huge part of it is around how do you maximize the amount of time that users are spending on the platform. It is not in the interest of their well-being. It is in the interest of capturing as much of their attention as possible in a way that will hook them and get them to get other people onto their platforms and to continue to use it in perpetuity. And so I think, some of understanding the kind of design features, the hooks that they use, the infinite scroll, the social comparison features, the like button, how all of those are not designed to help them connect. Ultimately, it's a way for them to make a lot of money. And I think that for young people to really understand that has helped them see, do I really want to be spending all my time on this to be just kind of essentially a pawn of these companies? And that we've seen, I've heard that kind of approach has been somewhat effective of helping change mindsets around these platforms. And yeah, just digital literacy more broadly, I think in tandem of strong adult mentorship and guidance and also good modeling behavior from adults. We all are also struggling with our own screen time, will go a long way.
And I appreciate you making that point of like, what are we modeling? Okay, kids, you can't have your phones in the classroom, but teachers on it until it's time to start class and then picks it up. Or coaches, we're on the bus and we're on our phones. And I always hear the argument of, well, but I'm recruiting, or well, but I need to do film, or and it's like, are we also creating spaces intentionally as adults to model for young people the value of phone-free time?
I recently heard a story or somebody talking about parental modeling and just adult modeling of phone behavior that really stuck with me. And what she was saying is that adults and we feel like what we're doing is so important. We're emailing, like we're recruiting, we're doing all these things, but what do kids see? All they see is the back of a phone. And especially for young kids, there's no distinction. It doesn't matter if you're emailing, it doesn't matter if you're on social media. What they see is a phone, and that phone is disconnecting them from you. And I think that that's just so important to realize. And yeah, so of course, there's a space for adults to be using these devices, and it is very important. And there is a difference between, adults and what adults are capable of doing and what kids should be allowed to do. We do that with all sorts of things, driving, drinking. But that just having that knowledge for me was really an eye opener, is that it doesn't matter what I'm doing. It looks the same to anyone who's looking around.
What do you say to young people that might argue back? I don't think I have a problem. I don't feel stressed. I like my phone, like that, you know, reject this notion that this is creating anxiety and stress and that it's unhealthy for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, if that is what a kid's experience, that I think that's fine. What is the bigger issue is around, what one is a question of like what is being displaced by all of this time on their devices, and having that conversation with the kid. And second is to remember that most kids today don't have any other memory other than having these devices with them all the time. What is the alternative? What is the mental model that they have of a kind of world that is different? And so the urgency that I would put out to your audience is thinking that we are the last generation of people who know a different kind of childhood. When Gen Z gets a little bit older and they're already becoming parents, what is the memory that they have other than what they 5 hours a day on social media, 10 hours a day on screens? We are kind of like there's an urgency here to provide kids with different ways of thinking about what it means to grow up in society and to be with other people and how to be with other people. And so that is what I would really say, is that it is our responsibility as adults to provide those different kinds of opportunities and experiences.
Yeah, and I just think about a hockey team I was with, on a retreat, a year ago, and they were out on this retreat, and they had their phones turned in, and they were all so traumatized that there were streaks on Snapchat were going to end, and it was the end of the world. And at the end of that weekend, the amount of young men that just were like, "Oh my gosh, that was so much fun this weekend,"
Hmm.
and I didn't actually miss my phone. Um, and I mean, I have the same experience whenever I go to the beach every year, every summer. I leave my phone up at the house, and I can be on the beach for hours reading, playing with the kids. It's just an amazing experience. There's nothing like it. So even we have to try to remember a life as
Yes.
adults without phones, right?
Zach, it's a little terrifying when you say like we are the last generation that knows a different childhood, and I panic a little bit because I'm like, but no, then it's going to become the norm, and then we're just going to keep, experiencing the detrimental impact of technology. So when you mentioned digital literacy, do you have any recommendations for the listeners about resources to check into, either to educate themselves as parents or as educators or as coaches, around how to help young people develop that literacy, or to create the awareness ourselves?
Yeah, so we have a lot of resources both on our website that your listeners can check out at anxiousgeneration.com. There's the Take Action tab, and there's resources for Gen Z, for parents, for teachers. We also have a Substack called After Babel, afterbabel.com, where we try to bring in lots of different perspectives from different researchers, parents, advocacy groups, and providing resources as well there. So those are two places I would recommend looking. And then the American Psychological Association also has some good resources on this. But you can always reach out to us when you go to Anxious Generation. Sign up at the bottom to join this movement where we're trying to roll back this phone-based childhood and restore a play-based, community-based childhood for the 21st century.
I can't help but just let you know that there's a bit of me that honestly feels a little bit depressed sometimes when I hear you talk or read the book, or even I go down to the coffee shop and I just kind of just pause and look up and just see everybody just on their phone, nobody talking, or even wander into the pub occasionally there, in Ireland here. And just, yeah, it's just like, so give me some hope, like, for this world here. Give us hope before you leave here.
Save us, Zach.
Well, I think the place to be hopeful is, my God, the energy from parents, from teachers, from principals, from kids themselves, from coaches. Everybody sees that this is an issue and everybody wants change, and it's happening so fast. The number one kind of pushback to the book and to our work, I believe, is really not that people disagree fundamentally. It's about that people feel resigned, that there's just nothing else that we can do. This is just the way that things are. And c'est la vie. But what I think the book has helped do, and also just the enormous energy from different writers and advocates, is to give people a sense that actually there is a lot that we can do, and it's not expensive, and it can happen quickly if we work together. And so I really recommend, you know, trying to implement those four norms, creating spaces for kids to get together. Because, like you said, with that story with the hockey team, it just took a couple of days. That is so valuable for kids. And we can do that every day, little bits of providing that kind of childhood, that kind of experience of growing up. That is just so valuable.
Yeah. Appreciate that so much. I appreciate your work, Zach. It's been fantastic, and I'm feeling the effects of it. As I mentioned before the call, there's 20 parents, all representing different primary or elementary schools here in Ireland in our town, and we're one of many. The dominoes are falling quickly here as more and more communities are, reading the book, The Anxious Generation, and signing these pacts where we're not going to give our kids smartphones until, they're well into their high school years. So we appreciate your work.
Thank you so much. I love the work that you're doing as well.
All right, that's a wrap on our conversation with Zach. Let's recap a few key takeaways I think every coach should consider. Number one, create more phone-free spaces in sports. I think sports today, they aren't as phone-free as we think. Like with so much of it being filmed or posted online, even when an athlete's playing or practicing, they might be still worried about social media and how they show up in that space there. So as coaches, we can make practices, team meetings, events, dinners, and bus rides phone-free zones, giving athletes a real break from their screens. I think the bus trip's one big one that we talked about today. Number two, I think we need to show our athletes trust by allowing them to the freedom to take responsibility and to struggle through that responsibility. By giving athletes the responsibility and letting them figure it out, we show trust and we're fostering opportunities for growth. Some ways we can do this are provide roles for athletes to mentor other leaders or to mentor others within the team, which is one of the big reasons I'm a huge fan of the leadership council units, where every leader on the team is in charge of supporting, connecting, and serving 3-4 individuals within the team. Also, I've even seen other coaches step up even do more. I've had one coach recently who assigned one of their varsity players who's a senior to being an assistant coach for the freshman team. I think it's just a beautiful, brilliant way to build responsibility. The third and final thing I think I would just share here too is just we touched on it today, was just set the example with our own phone use. Kids, majority of them, they already know the negatives of smartphones and social media. And so I think sometimes the most powerful message comes from our actions. And by modeling, balanced phone use, I think we can inspire our athletes to make healthier choices without needing to always lecture. So thank you for tuning in to the Coaching and Culture Podcast. If you found today's episode valuable, we'd love for you to leave a review, but most of all, share it with your athletes' parents, share it with your fellow coaches and friends. These episodes can make for some great conversation starters.